She thought she was untouchable. Victoria Ashcroft, billionaire heiress, and the most ruthless CEO in New York. She stood in front of the city's elite and smirked. "Beat me in chess and I'll marry you." She expected another arrogant banker to fail. She didn't expect him, the quiet janitor with the fraying collar who had been scrubbing her floors for 3 years. He stepped up, sat down, and didn't just play her. He destroyed her empire in 3 moves. But the checkmate was only the beginning of the scandal. The fluorescent lights of the Ashcroft Dynamics hallway hummed with a sound that only Caleb Sterling seemed to hear. It was 2 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in November, while the rest of New York City slept or partied. Caleb was on his knees, buffing a scuff mark off the pristine Italian marble of the 42nd floor lobby. Caleb was 32, though the grey streaks in his temples and the tired lines around his eyes argued for 40. He adjusted his name tag, Caleb S., Caleb, Facilities, and checked his watch. He had to be at the hospital by 6 a.m. to relieve the night nurse. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, had been readmitted for respiratory complications 3 days ago. The text message from the billing department burned a hole in his pocket. Final notice $14,200 due immediately. He dipped the rag into the bucket, the smell of industrial lemon cleaner filling his nose. "You missed a spot." The voice was cool, sharp, and unmistakably expensive. Caleb didn't look up immediately. He finished the circular motion of his hand, then slowly rose to his feet, wiping his hands on his navy blue work trousers. Victoria Ashcroft stood by the elevator bank, clutching a leather portfolio. She was striking in a way that felt more like a weapon than beauty. Her hair was a severe blonde bob, her suit tailored to within an inch of its life. At 28, she had taken her late father's company and turned it into a global logistics monster. She was known in the Wall Street Journal as the Ice Queen of Manhattan. "My apologies, Ms. Ashcroft." Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. He kept his eyes on the floor. It was safer that way. "The gala is tomorrow night, Caleb," she said, glancing at his name tag, though he doubted she actually registered it. "This floor needs to be a mirror. My board of directors will be walking through here, along with half the sharks from the venture capital world. If they see dirt, I see incompetence. Do you understand?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." She didn't wait for his response. The elevator dinged. She stepped in, and the doors slid shut, cutting off the scent of her Chanel perfume. Caleb let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. She had no idea. She had no idea that the man scrubbing her floors was once the youngest grandmaster in the state of Ohio. She had no idea that he had known her father, Arthur Ashcroft, better than she ever did. And she certainly had no idea that the strategic acquisition she was planning, the one he had seen on the discarded memos in the trash, was a trap set by her rival Silas Grant. But that wasn't his life anymore. He wasn't Caleb Sterling, the chess prodigy. He was just Caleb the janitor, who needed health insurance. The Ashcroft Charity Gala was the kind of event where the napkins cost more than Caleb's car. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was transformed into a winter wonderland. Ice sculptures dripped onto silver platters, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Caleb was working the event as extra security and cleanup, wearing a borrowed tuxedo that was a size too tight in the shoulders. He stood by the service entrance holding a tray of empty champagne flutes, trying to vanish into the wallpaper. The mood in the room was tense. Rumors were swirling. Ashcroft Dynamics was bleeding cash in the Asian markets, and the board was pressuring Victoria to merge with Silas Grant's conglomerate. Silas was there, hovering near the bar like a vulture in a tuxedo swishing a scotch. Victoria took the stage. The room went silent. She looked stunning in a silver gown that looked like liquid mercury, but Caleb saw the slight tremor in her hand as she held the microphone. She was cornered, and when Victoria Ashcroft was cornered, she didn't surrender. She attacked. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out, amplified by the speakers. "My board tells me I need a partner. They tell me a woman cannot run this empire alone. They say I need a king to secure my queen." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the crowd. Silas Grant smirked, raising his glass to her. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She pointed to a table in the center of the room. A beautiful antique chess set made of ivory and obsidian was set up there, a gift from her late father displayed for the auction. "I am tired of the mergers and the proposals," she declared, her voice dripping with disdain. "So let's settle this the old-fashioned way. If there is a man in this room with the intellect to match mine, step forward. Beat me in a single game of blitz chess. If you win, I will marry you. We merge our assets, and you get the seat at the head of the table." The crowd gasped. It was insane. It was theatrical. It was a PR stunt designed to humiliate Silas Grant, who was a known mediocre player. "But," she added, a cruel smile playing on her lips, "if you lose, you donate $1 million to the Ashcroft Foundation. Immediately." The room buzzed. It was a high-stakes gamble. Silas Grant's smile faded. He couldn't risk the public humiliation of losing, nor the $1 million. One by one, the wealthy bachelors shifted uncomfortably. No one moved. Victoria's reputation as a chess shark was well known. She had been tutored by Kasparov himself. "No one," Victoria taunted, stepping down from the stage to stand beside the board. "Is the courage of New York's elite so fragile?" Caleb watched from the shadows. He saw the desperation in her eyes. She was bluffing. She needed to assert dominance to shut the board up. Then his phone vibrated. He checked it discreetly. A text from the hospital. "Lily needs the ventilator. Insurance denied the claim. We need a deposit of $50,000 to proceed with the new treatment protocol tonight." 50,000. Tonight. Or Lily would be moved to state care, where the wait lists were a death sentence. Caleb looked at Victoria. He looked at the arrogant faces of the board members. He looked at the ivory king on the board. He set his tray of glasses down on a service table. The clatter drew a few eyes. He didn't care. He adjusted his cuffs, took a deep breath, and walked out of the shadows. "I accept." The voice was low, but it carried. The crowd parted. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. Who was this, a hedge fund manager? A visiting dignitary? Caleb stepped into the circle of light. The tuxedo couldn't hide his rough hands or the weary posture of a man who worked double shifts. Victoria stared at him. Recognition flickered in her eyes, then confusion. "You," she scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping her. "The janitor," Silas Grant let out a loud guffaw. "This is rich. The help wants a shot at the throne." "You said any man in the room," Caleb said calmly, stopping at the other side of the chessboard. "I'm in the room." Victoria's face hardened. She was being mocked. "Do you have $1 million to lose, Mr. Sterling?" Caleb said. "And no, I don't." "Then get out of my sight." "But," Caleb interrupted, his voice steel, "I have something more valuable. If I lose, I will sign over the patent rights to the hyper-efficient fuel cell algorithm your father was working on before he died. The one you've been trying to crack for 5 years." The room went dead silent. Victoria froze. That algorithm was the holy grail of the industry. It was missing. Her father had hidden it. "You have it," she whispered the microphone, catching her shock. "It's in my head." Caleb tapped his temple. "I helped him write it." Victoria studied him. Really studied him. For the first time, she saw not a janitor, but a dangerous opponent. "Sit down," she commanded. Caleb sat. The chair was velvet, far softer than the plastic stools in the hospital waiting room. He looked at the board. He hadn't played competitively in 7 years, not since the accident that took his wife and ruined his hands. Victoria sat opposite him. She signaled the timekeeper. 5 minutes. Blitz. "I'll take black," Caleb said softly. "Suit yourself." Victoria slammed her hand on the clock. She opened with the Queen's Gambit aggressive classic controlling the center. She moved with a speed that was practiced, snapping the pieces down with authority. She wanted to crush him quickly to end this farce. Caleb moved slower, his fingers scarred from fixing boiler pipes and soldering irons, handled the obsidian pieces with a strange, delicate grace. He played the Nimzo Indian defense, flexible, reactive. The crowd pressed in. Phones were out live streaming the janitor versus the CEO. For the first 20 moves, it was a slaughter. Or so it seemed. Victoria stripped his defenses. She took a knight, then a bishop. She was trading pieces aggressively, using her material advantage to corner his king. Caleb was sweating. The lights were hot. He could feel Silas Grant breathing down his neck. Lily, he thought. Focus on Lily. Victoria smirked. She saw the line. She moved her queen to H5. Check. Caleb moved his king. She moved her bishop. Check. Caleb blocked with a pawn. Victoria laughed. It was a cold, victorious sound. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for him. "You're a liar, Mr. Sterling. You don't have the algorithm. You're just a desperate man who wanted 5 minutes of fame. But now, you're going to owe me for the rest of your life." She reached for her rook. She was going to sacrifice it, to force a mate in 4 moves. It was a textbook execution. Caleb looked up. His eyes, usually a dull grey, were suddenly electric blue, sharp as cut glass. He looked at her not with fear, but with pity. "You play just like Arthur," Caleb said. Victoria paused, her hand hovering over the rook. "What? Aggressive? Arrogant? You think the board is yours because you paid for it?" Caleb reached out. He didn't touch his king. He touched his queen. "But you forgot the one lesson he taught me. And what is that? Never sacrifice your soul for position." "Wow. Move one." Caleb ignored her threat. He didn't defend. Instead, he slid his queen all the way across the board, sacrificing her directly in front of Victoria's king. Queen to G3. Check. The crowd screamed. It looked like a blunder. Victoria frowned. She had to take the queen. Her king had nowhere else to go. She took the queen. "Fool," she hissed. "Move 2. Caleb moved his knight. A quiet, unassuming piece he had left sitting on the rim of the board since the opening. Knight to F4, double check. Victoria's eyes widened. Her king was exposed. The knight covered the escape squares. The bishop he had abandoned 3 moves ago was suddenly a sniper rifle pointing at her heart. She realized with a jolt of nausea that he hadn't been losing. He had been herding her. She looked for an escape. There was only one square. She moved her king, her hand trembling violently. Move 3. Caleb didn't hesitate. He picked up a humble pawn. He advanced it 1 square. Pawn to h3. He didn't say checkmate. He didn't have to. The board was locked. Her king was trapped in a surge of her own pieces, suffocated by the very army she had used to attack him. It was a smothered mate, rare, beautiful, and humiliating. Caleb hit the clock. Click. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Silas Grant dropped his glass. It shattered the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Victoria stared at the board. She ran the lines in her head. Once, twice, 3 times. There was no way out. The janitor had beaten her. She looked up, her face, pale, stripped of all its armor. You. Caleb stood up. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him shaking. I believe that's game Ms. Ashcroft. The crowd erupted. Flashes blinded them. People were shouting. He won! The janitor won! Who is he? Is she really going to marry him? Victoria stood slowly, composing herself with supreme effort. She grabbed the microphone, silencing the room. She turned to Caleb, her eyes searching his face for any sign of mockery. She found none. A deal is a deal, she said, her voice tight but steady. She extended her hand. I'm a woman of my word. We will discuss the arrangements in private. Caleb looked at her manicured hand. He didn't take it. He stepped closer to the mic. I don't want your hand, Ms. Ashcroft, and I don't want your company. The crowd gasped again. Was he rejecting $1 billion? I have a daughter, Caleb said, his voice cracking slightly. She's 6. She's in the ICU at St. Jude's. She needs a surgery that costs $50,000, and I need my job back tomorrow morning so I can pay rent. He looked her dead in the eye. You keep the marriage. Just write the check for the hospital, and we'll call it even. He turned and walked away. He didn't wait for the applause. He didn't wait for her answer. He had to get back to Lily. Victoria stood alone on the stage, the most powerful woman in New York, completely undone by a man who scrubbed her toilets. She watched his retreating back, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than ambition. She felt intrigued. She turned to her assistant, who was gaping at the side of the stage. Get the car, Victoria barked, and get his file. I want to know everything about Caleb Sterling. Tonight. And the check, ma'am. Victoria looked at the chessboard, at the trap he had laid. Pay it, and triple it, and tell the driver we're going to St. Jude's. The beep of the heart monitor was the soundtrack of Caleb's life. He was asleep in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to Lily's bed, his head resting on the mattress. Lily was small for her age, her pale skin translucent against the white sheet's tubes running from her nose. Caleb jerked awake as the door to the ICU room hissed open. He rubbed his eyes, expecting a nurse. Instead, 2 men in dark suits entered, followed by Victoria Ashcroft. She had changed out of the silver gown into a sharp black power suit, though it was 4:00 a.m. She looked out of place in the sterile beige room, like a diamond dropped in the mud. Caleb stood up instinctively, placing himself between them and Lily. What are you doing here? He whispered harshly. This is a private room. I own the wing, Caleb, Victoria said softly. She wasn't gloating. She looked tired. She walked over to the foot of the bed and looked at Lily. Her expression softened in a way Caleb hadn't thought possible. She looks like you. She has her mother's chin, Caleb said defensively. Did you write the check? I did better, Victoria said, turning to face him. She pulled a document from her bag. I transferred Lily to the care of Dr. Aris Thorne. He's the best pediatric pulmonologist in the world. I flew him in from Zurich. He lands in an hour. Caleb felt his knees go weak. Dr. Thorne was a legend. He was also unaffordable. Why? Because I pay my debts, Victoria said, and because I have a proposition, a real one this time. She gestured to the hallway. Step outside with me. In the corridor under the harsh lights, Victoria dropped the facade. You embarrassed me tonight, Caleb. You humiliated Silas, which I enjoyed, but you made me look reckless. You were reckless, Caleb shot back. Perhaps, but the board is in a panic. The stock dropped 4% in after-hours trading because they think the CEO is engaged to a janitor. They are calling for a vote of no confidence. If I lose that vote, Silas Grant buys the company. He'll strip it for parts. He'll fire everyone, including you. Caleb crossed his arms. So issue a statement. Tell them I declined. They won't believe it. They'll think I bought you off. It looks weak. She stepped closer. I need you to marry me, Caleb. Caleb laughed, a dry, humorless sound. No, absolutely not. It's a business arrangement. She pressed her eyes intense. 6 months. We play the part of the whirlwind romance. The Queen's Gambit come to life. The press will eat it up, the Cinderella story, gender reversed. It stabilizes the stock. It keeps Silas away. And what do I get? Caleb asked. Aside from a headache, you get full medical coverage for Lily, for life. You get a trust fund for her education, and you get your dignity back. No more scrubbing floors. I know who you are, Caleb. She pulled a file from her folder. Caleb Sterling, Grandmaster at 19. You disappeared from the circuit 8 years ago after your wife died in a car accident. You blamed yourself because you were at a tournament in Russia when it happened. You punished yourself by taking a job beneath your station, hiding from the world. Caleb's face went white. Stop. My father mentioned you, she said quietly. In his journals, he said you were the only player who ever understood that chess wasn't about war. It was about art. He wondered where you went. Caleb looked through the glass window at Lily. She was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. If he did this, her future was secured. If he didn't, he was back to minimum wage and maxed out credit cards. 6 months, Caleb asked. 6 months. Then we divorce quietly. Irreconcilable differences. And I don't sleep in your bed, Victoria scoffed. Don't flatter yourself, Sterling. You'll sleep in the guest wing. But in public you hold my hand. You smile. And you help me destroy Silas Grant. Caleb looked at her. He saw the steel, but he also saw the fear behind it. She was fighting for her father's legacy. He was fighting for his daughter's life. Fine, Caleb said, but one condition. Name it. I don't just want to be a trophy husband. If I'm in, I'm in. I want access to the R&D files. I want to work on the algorithm your father left. I can finish it. Victoria hesitated. That algorithm was the company's biggest secret. Trusting him with it was insane. But then she remembered the 3 moves, the way he had dismantled her. Deal, she said. She held out her hand again. This time Caleb took it. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. Welcome to the family, Mr. Sterling, she said. Try not to break anything. The transition from a basement apartment in Queens to the penthouse of the Ashcroft Tower was not a step up. It was a collision of worlds. Caleb stood in the center of the living room, which was larger than his entire previous apartment building. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of Central Park, but the space felt cold. Everything was white chrome or black marble. There were no photos on the walls, no clutter, no life. It was a museum, not a home. "Your room is the East Wing," Victoria said, walking past him while typing furiously on her phone. "Lily's room has been set up next to yours. I had my assistant by. Whatever it is 6-year-olds need. Toys. Pink things. If she needs anything else, tell the staff." Caleb bristled. "Her name is Lily, and she likes dinosaurs, not pink things." Victoria stopped and looked up from her screen, her expression unreadable. "Noted. Dinosaurs. I'll have the interior designer adjust." "We don't need a designer, Victoria. We need a home." Caleb picked up his duffel bag, his only luggage. "And we need to get one thing straight. I'm doing this for her. I'm not your prop." "In this house, you are Caleb," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "But out there," she pointed to the window to the city below, "out there you are the love of my life. You are the hidden genius who stole my heart. Do not break character. Silas Grant is watching every move we make." The transformation. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliation and strategy. Victoria's team of stylists descended upon Caleb like a swarm of locusts. They cut his hair, shaved the rough stubble, and measured him for suits that cost more than his father had made in a lifetime. When Caleb emerged from the dressing room, in a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit, the chatter of the stylists stopped. Victoria was sitting on a velvet ottoman, reviewing merger contracts. She looked up and paused. For a moment, the calculating CEO vanished, replaced by a woman caught off guard. Caleb didn't look like a janitor anymore. He looked commanding. The suit accentuated his broad shoulders, and the clean shave revealed a jawline that was both strong and kind. "Well," Victoria said, clearing her throat and standing up. "That will do. You look adequate." Caleb tugged at the cuffs. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume." "You are," she said, stepping close to fix his tie. Her fingers grazed his neck, sending a jolt of electricity through him that he suspected she felt too, because she pulled her hand away quickly. "Tonight is the press conference. We announce the engagement. We announce your appointment as head of special projects, and we announce that the algorithm is nearing completion." "Is it?" Caleb asked. "No, but they don't know that. We need to buy time." The press conference. The atrium of Ashcroft Dynamics was packed. Cameras flashed like lightning storms. Reporters shouted over one another. Victoria stood at the podium, her hand resting possessively on Caleb's arm. She played the part perfectly, the smitten heiress. She told a fabricated story of how they met late at night in the archives discussing chess strategies and logistics. "Caleb is not just my partner in life," Victoria told the cameras, beaming a smile that didn't reach her guarded eyes. "He is the intellect this company has been missing. He has been working in stealth mode for years, helping me refine our vision." A reporter from the Financial Times stood up. "Mr. Sterling, you have no degree in engineering. You were on the payroll as custodial staff. How do you explain that?" Caleb stepped to the mic. Victoria's grip on his arm tightened. She was terrified he would freeze. "Steve Jobs dropped out of college," Caleb said, his voice calm and deep. "Einstein was a patent clerk. Sometimes, to see the problems clearly, you have to look at them from the ground up, not the top down. I've been cleaning up the messes in this building for 3 years. I know exactly where the cracks are." The reporters went silent, then scribbled furiously. It was a perfect sound bite. But in the back of the room, leaning against a marble pillar, Silas Grant watched. He wasn't writing. He was smiling. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "It's me," Silas whispered. "Dig deeper. I don't care if you have to exhume his dead wife's body. Find me the dirt. And if there isn't any, manufacture it." The lab. The real challenge wasn't the press. It was the engineers. The next morning, Caleb walked into the R&D department, the sanctum of Ashcroft Dynamics. The head engineer, a man named Dr. Vance, corrupted by his own ego, laughed when Caleb asked to see the source code for the Arthur algorithm. "Look, Mr. Sterling," Vance sneered, tossing a tablet onto the table. "I know you're sleeping with the boss, and that's a great career move, really. But this is quantum logistics. It's not mopping floors. Don't touch anything." Caleb didn't get angry. He walked to the massive whiteboard covering the far wall. It was covered in red ink formulas that had hit a dead end. The team had been stuck on the fuel consumption variable for 6 months. Caleb picked up a black marker. He stood there for a long minute. He closed his eyes. He visualized the chessboard. The variables weren't numbers to him. They were pieces. The fuel was the rook. The distance was the bishop. The time was the knight. The knight is pinned, he thought. Unpin the knight. He uncapped the marker. He didn't erase their work. He drew a line through the central equation and wrote a new variable in the margin. A sacrifice of data efficiency to gain velocity. Clack, clack, clack. The marker hit the board rhythmically. He worked for 10 minutes. When he stepped back, the room was silent. Dr. Vance stood up, his face pale. He walked to the board, tracing the numbers with a trembling finger. "He bypassed the thermal throttle," Vance whispered. "He used a recursive loop. It's stable." Caleb capped the marker and tossed it to Vance. "You were trying to force the engine to conserve energy. You should have been letting it burn efficiently. It's the Queen's Gambit. Sometimes you have to give up material to win position." Caleb turned to leave. "Upload the new code. I want a simulation by noon." As he walked out, the engineers didn't look at him with disdain anymore. They looked at him with fear. He wasn't just a prop. He was the king. But as Caleb walked back to the elevator, he felt a vibration in his pocket. A text message. Unknown number. "Nice speech, janitor. But do you know what really happened to your wife's car that night? Ask Victoria." Caleb stopped cold in the hallway. The blood drained from his face. The penthouse was quiet, save for the sound of cartoons. Lily had been discharged from the hospital 3 days after the press conference. She was still weak, but Dr. Thorne's treatment was working miracles. She sat on the sprawling white leather sofa, clutching a stuffed triceratops, watching the land before time. Victoria walked in from a late board meeting looking exhausted. She dropped her keys on the console table and froze. There was a pepperoni pizza box sitting on her $20,000 Italian coffee table. Grease stains were threatening the marble. "Caleb," she sighed, rubbing her temples. Caleb walked in from the kitchen, wiping flour off his hands. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, a stark contrast to the corporate armor he wore during the day. She was hungry, and the private chef made her deconstructed salmon foam. "She's 6, Victoria. She eats pizza." Victoria looked at the pizza, then at Lily. Lily looked up, her big eyes wide with apprehension. "Hi, Miss Victoria," Lily squeaked. "Do you want a slice? It has extra cheese." Victoria's strict demeanor faltered. She looked at the little girl who was alive only because of this strange arrangement. She kicked off her high heels. She walked over to the sofa, careful not to sit on the grease, and sat on the edge. "I have never had pepperoni," Victoria admitted. Lily gasped. "Never, Daddy? She's never had pepperoni." "Tragic." Caleb deadpanned. "Here." He handed Victoria a slice on a paper napkin. Victoria took a bite. It was greasy, salty, and terrible for her diet. It was delicious. For the first time in years, the Ice Queen let out a genuine, unpolished laugh when a string of cheese got stuck to her chin. For the next hour, there was no talk of stocks or mergers or Silas Grant. There was just a makeshift family in a glass tower. Caleb watched Victoria explain to Lily why she ran a logistics company. "I move toys from the factory to the store so you can buy them." And he saw the sadness behind her ambition. She was lonely, desperately lonely. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Caleb found Victoria on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "You're good with her," Victoria said without turning around. "She's my world," Caleb said, standing beside her. He hesitated, then pulled his phone out. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." He showed her the text message. "Ask Victoria what happened to your wife's car." Victoria read it. Her face remained impassive, but her grip on the railing tightened until her knuckles turned white. "Silas is playing games," she said coldly. "Is he?" Caleb pressed. "My wife's brakes failed. The police said it was a manufacturing defect. But this implies you know something." Victoria turned to him. Her eyes were wet. "My father," she whispered. "Arthur. He didn't just build engines. He tested them on consumer vehicles to gather data." Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. "What?" "Years ago, Ashcroft Dynamics supplied the brake sensors for the model of car your wife drove. There was a memo, a safety warning about a glitch in cold weather. My father, he buried the memo. He calculated that the cost of a recall was higher than the cost of settling lawsuits." Caleb stepped back as if he had been slapped. "You knew." "I found out after he died," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "I found the files in his safe. That's why I helped you, Caleb. Not just to save the company, but because I owe you a debt I can never repay. My family killed your wife." Caleb stared at her. The woman he was starting to respect. The woman he was pretending to love. He felt a surge of nausea. "You didn't help me out of kindness. You helped me out of guilt." "Does it matter?" she pleaded. "Lily is alive. You have a future." "It matters," Caleb hissed. "It changes everything." He turned to storm back inside, but the elevator doors dinged. 4 security guards stepped out. Behind them was Silas Grant, looking triumphant. "Touching scene." Silas slow-clapped, stepping into the living room. "Truly Shakespearean. The murderer's daughter and the grieving husband. Get out of my house, Silas." Victoria snapped, wiping her eyes and stepping in front of Caleb. "I'm afraid I'm not here for a social call." Silas grinned. He gestured to the guards. "We're here for Mr. Sterling." "On what grounds?" Caleb demanded. "Corporate espionage," Silas said, pulling a folded warrant from his pocket. "We received an anonymous tip that the new head of special projects was selling the Arthur algorithm to our Chinese competitors. We tracked the IP address. It came from this penthouse. From your laptop, Caleb." "That's a lie," Victoria shouted. "He's been working on the code for us." "Has he?" Silas raised an eyebrow. Or has he been modifying it to fail? We checked the bank accounts, Caleb. $5 million was wired to an account in the Cayman Islands in your name this morning. Caleb froze. The setup was perfect. Silas had planted the money. Victoria, Caleb said, looking at her. I didn't do this. You know I didn't. Victoria looked at Silas, then at the warrant, and finally at Caleb. She was trapped. If she defended him, she looked like an accomplice. If she let him be taken, she lost her only ally. But the revelation about her father was still hanging in the air. The trust was shattered. Take him, Silas ordered. 2 guards grabbed Caleb. He didn't fight. He didn't want to wake Lily. Victoria, Caleb yelled as they dragged him toward the elevator. Check the recursive loop. The code, I wrote it, holds the key. Don't let him have the company. The elevator doors shut, cutting off his voice. Victoria stood alone in the silence of the penthouse. Silas Grant walked over to the bar and poured himself a drink. Don't look so sad, Vicky. Silas smirked. You're better off without the help. The board vote is tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll accept your resignation then. The cell. Caleb sat in the holding cell at the 19th precinct. They had taken his phone, his belt, and his shoelaces. He sat on the metal bench, head in his hands. He had lost. He had lost Lily. He had lost his dignity. And he was about to go to prison for a crime he didn't commit, orchestrated by the man who wanted to destroy everything. But his mind wouldn't stop working. He replayed the chess game. Silas made a move, he thought. The warrant. The bank transfer. It was a queen's gambit. Aggressive. Flashy. Caleb closed his eyes. He visualized the code he had written on the whiteboard. The recursive loop. He hadn't just fixed the engine. He had embedded something in the code. A signature. A timestamp. And a failsafe. If Silas tried to run the algorithm without the encryption key that only Caleb knew, the system wouldn't just fail. It would broadcast the source of the interference. Caleb smiled in the darkness. He was in check. But he wasn't mated. The visitor. At 5 a.m. a guard banged on the bars. Sterling, lawyer. Caleb looked up. He didn't have a lawyer. The gate buzzed open. Caleb walked into the interrogation room. Sitting at the table wasn't a lawyer. It was Victoria. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie. She slid a tablet across the table. I fired the security team, she said, her voice hoarse. I hacked the internal logs myself. I saw the transfer. It was authorized by a shell company owned by Silas's brother-in-law. Caleb sat down slowly. You believe me? I don't know, she said honestly. But I know chess, and I know you. You don't play for money. You play for position. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. Her palm was warm. The board meeting is in 4 hours, she said. Silas is going to present the stolen evidence and force the sale. I can't stop him alone. I'm in jail, Victoria. I can't be there. Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a heavy brass key. It wasn't a key to the cell. It was the key to the executive elevator override. Bail has been posted, she said. The car is outside, but we aren't going to the office. Where are we going? To the one place Silas won't look, she said, standing up. We're going to the old factory in Brooklyn, where my father built the first prototype. If your code is real, we have to prove it works on a real engine, not a simulation. Caleb stood up. The exhaustion vanished. The game was back on. Let's go, he said. "It's time for the end game." The heavy iron doors of the derelict warehouse in Brooklyn groaned as Caleb forced them open. The space inside smelled of rust-old oil and the ghostly memory of industry. This was where Ashcroft Dynamics had started 40 years ago, before the glass towers and the IPOs. Victoria shivered, hugging her hoodie tight against the damp morning chill. "My father kept the original prototype here," she said, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "The Mark I logistics hauler. He said it was the only machine pure enough to test the theory." They ran toward the center of the factory floor. There, under a dusty canvas tarp, sat a monstrous semi-truck engine mounted on a steel testing rig. It looked like a sleeping beast. Caleb didn't waste time. He pulled the tarp off, revealing the complex maze of pipes and valves. He set his laptop on a rusty workbench and began searching for the diagnostic port. "Hold this," Caleb ordered, handing Victoria a flashlight. She took it, her hands trembling. "Caleb, about what I said earlier. About the brakes." "Not now, Victoria." Caleb said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We have 3 hours before Silas sells your company and sends me to prison. We need to focus on the board." "I need you to know," she insisted, stepping closer, forcing him to look at her. The beam of the flashlight cut between them. "I didn't know about the defect until it was too late. But when I found out, I started the foundation, the pediatric wing at St. Jude's. That was for her. It was for your wife. It was blood money, Caleb. I know that. But I've been trying to atone for a sin I didn't commit for 5 years. Caleb paused. He looked at the woman who had been the villain of his story for so long. He saw the tears mixing with the grime on her face. He saw the regret that had hardened her into the Ice Queen. "You're not your father, Victoria," Caleb said softly. He plugged the connector into the engine's ECU. Arthur Ashcroft would have buried the company to save his reputation. You're risking everything to save the truth. That's the difference. He turned back to the screen. "Now light it up." The test. The challenge was physical as much as digital. The engine hadn't run in a decade. While Caleb coded the bypass to inject his algorithm into the ancient system, Victoria had to manually prime the fuel pumps. "Crank it," Caleb yelled over the hum of the laptop. Victoria threw the heavy breaker switch. Ka-chunk. Whirr. The starter motor screamed, but the engine didn't catch. "Again!" Caleb shouted, typing furiously. He was rewriting the ignition timing in real time, adjusting the variables to account for the cold and the age of the machine. Victoria threw the switch again. Whirr. Cough. Sputter. "It's flooding!" she yelled. "It's not flooding, it's choking." Caleb realized the problem. The algorithm was too efficient. It was cutting fuel flow before the combustion cycle could sustain itself. It was the same problem the engineers had faced. He closed his eyes. He visualized the board. The knight is blocking the bishop. Sacrifice the knight. "I'm removing the safety limits," Caleb said. "That will blow the cylinder heads," Victoria warned. "Trust me." Caleb looked at her. "Trust the janitor." Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she nodded. She trusted him. Caleb hit enter. "Now." Victoria threw the switch. With a roar that shook the dust from the rafters, the Mark I engine exploded into life. It didn't just run, it sang. The revs climbed steadily, the sound smoothing out from a jagged cough to a powerful rhythmic thrum. Caleb grabbed the monitor. Look at the efficiency curve, he pointed. Victoria gasped. The graph was a vertical line. 98% fuel combustion, near zero thermal waste. Caleb, this is impossible. This changes the entire shipping industry. We can cross the country on a single tank. It's the Arthur algorithm, Caleb said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Finished. But their victory was cut short by a sound from outside. Tires screeching on wet pavement. Car doors slamming. Caleb ran to the grimy window. 2 black SUVs had pulled up. 4 men were getting out. They weren't police. They were private security, Here's Silas Grant's fixers. He tracked the car, Caleb cursed. He knew you'd come here. The upload isn't done, Victoria said, staring at the progress bar on the screen. 80%. 85%. We can't leave without the data, Caleb said. He looked around the factory. We need to buy time. The defense. The metal door banged. Ms. Ashcroft, a voice boomed. We know you're in there. Open up. Caleb grabbed a heavy wrench. How long? 2 minutes. Victoria said, her voice shaking, but her hands steady on the keyboard. I'll hold them off. Caleb, no. They're armed. It's a chess game, Victoria. Caleb gave her a grim smile. I'm just the pawn. You're the queen. You have to survive to win the game. He ran toward the loading bay doors. He hit the control for the hydraulic lift, sending a cascade of metal crates crashing down in front of the entrance, just as the men tried to breach it. It wouldn't stop them forever, but it created a barricade. 95%, Victoria screamed. The back door kicked open. One of the men entered, a taser gun raised. Caleb didn't hesitate. He swung the wrench, hitting a fire extinguisher on the wall. The tank exploded, filling the room with blinding white chemical fog. In the confusion, Caleb tackled the man. They rolled on the concrete floor. Caleb wasn't a fighter, but he was a father fighting for his daughter's future. He took a heavy blow to the ribs, but he managed to shove the man into a stack of old tires. Done, Victoria yelled. She ripped the flash drive from the laptop. Run, Caleb shouted, scrambling to his feet, clutching his side. They sprinted out the side exit into the pouring rain. They dove into Victoria's car just as the security team burst through the smoke. Victoria slammed the accelerator. The car fishtailed on the wet cobblestones, tires spinning, before gripping the road and launching them forward. Caleb slumped in the passenger seat, breathing hard. Did we get it? Victoria held up the silver flash drive. We got the king. She looked at the dashboard clock. 8:45 a.m. The meeting starts in 15 minutes, and we're in Brooklyn. Victoria Ashcroft's eyes narrowed. The Ice Queen was gone. The race car driver was here. Hold on, she said, shifting gears. I'm going to drive like a New Yorker. The boardroom of Ashcroft Dynamics was a fortress of silence and mahogany. The long table was occupied by 12 men and women who controlled billions of dollars. At the head of the table sat Silas Grant. He had already taken Victoria's chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Silas said, checking his gold watch. It is 9:05 a.m. Victoria Ashcroft is absent. Her fiancé, the janitor, is currently in police custody for embezzlement. The stock is in free fall. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and the ratification of the acquisition by Grant Logistics. This feels rushed, Silas, one of the older board members muttered. Arthur's daughter deserves a chance to speak. She has spoken with her actions, Silas sneered. She entrusted our proprietary secrets to a criminal. The company is compromised. We need stability. We need leadership. He raised his hand, all in favor of the acquisition. Slowly hands began to rise. 1, 2, 5, 7. Motion carried. Silas grinned the victory, tasting like aged scotch. I will inform the SEC. The interruption. Bam. The double doors of the boardroom didn't just open. They were kicked open. Victoria Ashcroft stood there. She was soaking wet. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her hoodie was stained with grease. She looked like a wreck. But she also looked terrifying. Beside her stood Caleb Sterling. His lip was cut, his knuckles were bruised, and he was holding his side. I object, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. Security, Silas shouted, standing up. Remove these trespassers. Sit down, Silas, Victoria barked. The authority in her voice was so absolute that Silas actually faltered. She marched to the head of the table. She didn't sit. She stood over him. You told the board the algorithm was stolen, Victoria said. You told them it was a failure. It is, Silas sputtered. We have the logs. You have a fake, Caleb spoke up, stepping forward. He limped slightly, but his gaze was steady. You have the version I let you steal. Caleb pulled a crumpled USB drive from his pocket and jammed it into the room's central projector system. You play a decent opening game, Silas, Caleb said, typing on the command console. But you forgot to watch your back rank. The reveal. The massive screen behind Silas flickered to life. It didn't show code. It showed a video file. It was the footage from the warehouse, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. The board members watched in stunned silence as the Mark I engine roared to life. They saw the telemetry data overlay the efficiency curve that defied the laws of physics. This is the Arthur algorithm, Victoria announced. Alive, functional, and exclusive to Ashcroft Dynamics. The room erupted in murmurs. Trillions, someone whispered. That efficiency. It's worth trillions. Silas's face went pale. It's a trick, a simulation. There's more, Caleb said calmly. When I wrote the code you stole, Silas, I embedded a Trojan pawn. He hit a key. The screen changed. It displayed a complex web of bank transfers and IP addresses. The code you stole has a beacon, Caleb explained. It doesn't just run, it reports home. It reported that it was installed on a server at Grant Logistics 3 days before the alleged theft. And it reported the wire transfer of $5 million came from an account linked to your personal holdings, Silas. Caleb pointed to the screen. That's not just corporate espionage, that's fraud. That's a felony. The board members turned to Silas. The looks of deference were gone, replaced by disgust and anger. You tried to frame me, Caleb said, leaning on the table. You tried to destroy Victoria. You wanted the company so badly you moved your king into a trap. Silas looked around the room. He was surrounded. He was alone. Checkmate, Caleb whispered. The aftermath. 2 hours later, Silas Grant was escorted out of the building in handcuffs by the FBI. The board had unanimously voted to keep Victoria as CEO. The stock price hadn't just recovered, it had doubled. Victoria and Caleb sat alone in her office. The adrenaline had faded, leaving them both exhausted. Victoria sat on her couch, holding an ice pack to her head. Caleb stood by the window, looking out at the city he used to clean. You saved it, Victoria said softly. You saved everything. We saved it, Caleb corrected. He turned to face her. So, the contract. 6 months, right? Victoria looked down at her hands. Technically. The danger is gone. Silas is gone. You don't have to stay. I'll transfer the money for Lily's trust. You can go back to being Caleb Sterling." Caleb walked over to the couch. He sat down next to her. The distance between them felt different now. It wasn't an employer and an employee. It wasn't a fake couple. "I can't go back to being Caleb Sterling," he said, "because Caleb Sterling was a guy who was hiding from the world. I'm not hiding anymore." He reached out and took the ice pack from her hand, gently placing it on the table. "And besides," Caleb smiled, "Lily really likes the view from the penthouse, and she's getting attached to the pizza here." Victoria looked at him, hope flaring in her eyes. "And you?" "I think I've finally found a worthy opponent," Caleb said. He picked up a knight from the decorative chess set on her coffee table. "But I have one condition." "Another one?" Victoria laughed, a sound of pure relief. "No more secrets. No more games between us. We play on the same side of the board." Victoria leaned in. "Deal." She kissed him. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for the board. It was tentative sweet and real. It tasted like rain and victory. 6 months later. The Central Park Chess Club was bustling. The autumn leaves were falling, covering the stone tables in gold. A crowd had gathered around Table 1. On one side sat Victoria Ashcroft, wearing a comfortable sweater, looking relaxed and radiant. On the other side sat Caleb Sterling, the new Chief Technology Officer of Ashcroft Dynamics. Between them on a crate sat Lily, wearing a dinosaur t-shirt, acting as the referee. "Check," Victoria said, moving her bishop. Caleb smiled. He studied the board. She had improved. Tremendously. She wasn't just attacking anymore. She was building, strategizing. "Not bad," Caleb said. "But you missed the diagonal." He moved his queen. Victoria's eyes widened. She saw the trap. But instead of getting angry, she smiled. She laughed. "I resign," she said, tipping her king over. "You gave up too early," Caleb said, taking her hand across the table. "You had a draw in 3 moves." "Maybe." Victoria squeezed his hand. "But I've already won the only prize that matters." Lily groaned loudly. "Ugh, you guys are so mushy. Can we go get ice cream now?" Caleb stood up and scooped his daughter into his arms. Victoria stood up beside him, looping her arm through his. "Yes, we can," Caleb said. They walked out of the park together, a family forged in the fire of a game, proving that sometimes a pawn can change the fate of the queen, and the most powerful move on the board isn't a checkmate, it's a partnership. And that is the story of how a janitor checkmated a billionaire, not just on the board, but in life. It reminds us that intellect and worth aren't defined by your job title or the zeros in your bank account. Caleb Sterling taught the world that the most dangerous piece on the board is the one you underestimate. Victoria learned that true power comes from vulnerability and trust. What did you think of Caleb's strategy? Would you have taken the deal? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of twists, redemption, and romance, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have amazing new dramas coming every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, always watch your back rank.